Today, we'll be going through an introduction to SQL, which is a foundation of data analytics. Prior to when a lot of people, we moved into the space of using things like Python, MongoDB, and some other more, what I call it, other data languages. SQL has been around for quite a while, and we'll quickly go through that. I will run through a quick introduction just to help give an overview. Now, it's important that we have a clear understanding of what a database is. Many of us have heard that term, but just to simplify it in simple English, is just an organized collection of information, just the way you would have in your wardrobe. That if you want to see, your wardrobe can be a sample of a database where you have your clothes and you've organized them properly. So you could have shoes in a certain area, you could have clothes in a certain area. If you keep perfumes in your wardrobe, you have perfumes in a certain part of your wardrobe. Now, many times a database consists of tables, just like what we have in Excel. Excel is like a table where you would have rows and columns. Now, the tables are entities, and in those entities, you have relationship between them. For the entities will be seen as real world objects. A good parallel I can use is when you talk about nouns. For those who when you were learning the definition of a noun, they tell you we are told a noun is a name of a person, animal, place, or a thing. Now that definition has stuck over the years. It's very simple. And that's the same way we would look at an entity. An entity is an object or a thing of interest to the person who creates the database. So the entity, for example, could be a person, a product, an order. If you are looking at Amazon could have the entity will be the order table where they have a record of all orders that have been placed. Or if I'm in HR, the entity would be like the employee records. That's one. Now, for relationships, which is a critical part, the relationships define how two or more entities are connected to each other. So if you were looking at an employee record, the employee record can be connected to the department record, where you are saying, okay, this employee's record, maybe the employee ID, and then you have the department. What is this person's department? What is this person's role in that department? How long has he been in that department? And then you can link a relationship to the employee record to say, okay, this employee in this department, what's his first name, his last name, his date of birth, maybe his home address, which might not be of interest in the department table. And that brings us over to the table. Now, when dealing with in SQL or databases, database use tables. Those tables will usually consist of rows and columns. Now, the tables help us define relationships amongst them between the entities. Now, when we look at the table, you would have a row. So if you were let's use the example, the NHS within the UK, a patient record. When you have a patient's record, that is a row. Now, within that row, you would have columns. The columns will define the features of the entity. So in the patient's record, you would have maybe the patient's name. You could have what type of disease the patient might have. That's a feature within that table, that record will be held in a column within that table. And then an interesting concept which we have to keep in mind is what we refer to as the primary key and then the foreign key. The primary key is a unique value in a table, which is mandatory and defines relationships between tables. Then you also have a foreign key. What you use a foreign key is used to reference another table. So if you are familiar with Excel, what you will have in Excel is if you are doing a lookup, maybe like VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP from an Excel spreadsheet, you want to look up a value in another sheet. Now that value in one table can be seen as the primary key in the first table, and then you use that value to look up the value in another table. So that's the way you could look at it in terms of how, like, a primary key, a foreign key, where one table has something that is unique, another table has something that is not so, it's like it's used to reference another table. Now, what you would find in that is there's what we refer to as the type of relationship. And it's important to have a good understanding because when we get to Power BI, the understanding about the relationships between tables come in very handy. It's a whole different concept when you're talking about data modeling. Data modeling is trying to design how the relationships between tables in a database would be. And you have what we call a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, and then a many-to-many relationship. An easy way to understand a one-to-one relationship would be like a person and a passport. You have one person with one passport. That's a one-to-one relationship. You can't have multiple people linked to one passport ID. It's one person to one passport ID. When we then get to the issue of the area of one-to-many relationship, you can look at it from maybe when in school, you have a teacher who is assigned to a teacher and then students. So one teacher might handle one subject. So that teacher is assigned to many students, but those many students would be linked to just one teacher. So that's where we look at one-to-many relationship. Then you have the many-to-many relationships as well. That's another concept within that space where you are looking at things like maybe student ID and courses or student and courses. So you could have students taking many courses and then you have many courses linked to that student ID. And that's how you look at those three areas of one-to-one, one-to-many, and then a many-to-many relationship. Okay. All right, and then quickly, we're almost getting to the hands-on part of it, but we just need to clear out the theoretical side of things. SQL, as I said, has been around for a while, and the basic definition of what that acronym stands for is Structured Query Language. Now, to understand what you are doing with SQL, all you are using is using that language to ask questions of the database. Now, the same way we all learned English and we were taught parts of speech, we were taught things like nouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives. That's the same way it applies when dealing with SQL, that you would understand what are the components of SQL. How do I start breaking that down so that I can use that language to ask questions from my database? Now, there are three major sides in SQL, which is the data definition language, the data manipulation language, and then the data control language. The one that is of crucial importance to any analyst will be the data manipulation language. But the data definition language also helps because it's based on what level of access you have to the database. What the data definition language is for is when we want to create information. So we want to create, alter, or drop information. So drop is another word for delete. So you want to create information in a database, you want to alter information in that database, or you want to delete information in that database. So that's where you will see DDL. Then you have the data manipulation language. Data manipulation language is basically when you want to that's the language is when you're asking queries or trying to make certain changes in your database. And then you have the data control language. So the data control language would be things like where you need to give access or revoke access to a database. Now, most of the, as I say, data definition and possibly most times the data control language would be within the ambit of maybe a database administrator. But for most of the data manipulation language, also depends on the level of access or the rights you have as an within the database. Most people would have the ability to use the data manipulation language to query the database. Go into the hands-on session, which is where would be helpful for everyone. And we're going to create relationships between the tables. And after that, we'll write a few queries anyway. I'll just provide that syntax. But next week is when we'll go deeply into doing that. I will just show a brief overview of what this would look like, which is what we refer to as an entity relationship diagram that shows the relationship between different tables in our database. So in the file that I gave, I think I sent a folder during the week. And when I sent that, you would see there are about 7 or 8 files there. Each of those files is a table, which we would call an entity. And within those entities, you will have your row and your table. And then we have the relationship. So we will then go ahead to define the relationship between these tables, which in this instance, we are going to be using a one-to-many relationship. Okay. Okay, so let me just open this. I don't know how many of us have, for those who have not been able to complete the installation, you can watch the video I sent for the installation. And then in this session, we will go through the process of creating the database here. And just to let me put a context. Now, this database that we are creating already has like files, Excel files, which you just upload. There is another way to create a database where I'm actually writing the queries themselves to create that database. And we'll do a bit of that as well. Okay. All right. So I'll just take a break. There's a hand up. If you want to ask a question, please go ahead.
Just very fast, not to delay you. Is it possible to download this SQL in MacBook?
Yes, it's possible to download it in MacBook. I don't have the instructions, but you can give it a go. If you go to Microsoft's website and then just put that. So what you just put on Google, downloads Microsoft's SQL 2022 on MacBook. It will take you to the link on Microsoft's website, and then you can download it. There's also like a guide, the documentation on the steps to do it.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So when you open your file, usually you will see it like this. That's databases. What you need to do first of all is right-click on database. It will show you, it will bring out this box here, and then you click on new database. So as I click on new database, it will ask me what is the name of the database that I want to create. So I'm going to call this sales analysis for my database, sales analysis. Now, one of the things I'll come to that. So sales analysis, okay. There is also a convention, a naming convention when we are naming tables, when we are naming fields in SQL, which is a different subject area that we might not delve into, but just have it at the back of your mind that there is a naming convention. Maybe I might touch on that next week to help to provide some context. Now, as you've seen, once I've created it, you can see sales analysis now shows up here. If you click on the plus button, you'll see database, diagram, tables. So what we want to do is that we want to create tables. Now, those tables will show up in this table column here. So if I right-click on sales analysis, and then I go to task, and then import flat file, because the files that I sent across were CSV files. That's comma separated CSV, comma separated value. That's the file type. So I click on that and then next. And then I need to click on browse to go to the location. So I'll pick all these files one by one. So categories, next. So it would give me a view of what this table looks like. So I can see the table and I click on next. And then the next thing is it's, okay, what is the primary key in this table? Please note, when creating a primary key, there are no null values. A null value will be an empty field. So you can't leave empty fields when you select a field as a primary key. So in this instance, we're using the category ID as a primary key. So I select this and then next. And it shows you to complete the operation using specified input, click finished. So I click finished and that's it. And I close. So if I come back here, right click here and just click on refresh and I go to data tables, you'll see database object categories. It's created that table here. I will do the same thing for all the other tables. So I'll go to task, import fast file, next, browse, customers. Okay, next. So this is what the table looks like here. And I click on next. And I would then decide, okay, what do I want to use as my primary key? So we're using the customer ID here as a primary key. And then please note, you can see in the postcode here, the SQL Server has already identified that, okay, it's possible to leave a null value here. So it's indicated that no problem, I can leave that. Now, also in this data type, which is something that we can go into when we're going to write, if you want to write the query itself, because this one, what we are doing is this like a quick approach where Microsoft SQL Server is helping us to identify the data type. The data type in each of these fields will tell you how that field is designed. So like, for example, the customer ID, it tells you tiny int, that's tiny integer. So this one, customer name is n number of variable characters, that's 50. So that tells that the length of the characters there will be 50. If I wanted to change it, I could click here and decide to change it to something else. Maybe if I want 5, maybe 50. So sometimes, because this might be limited and I want something much more, that's where I can decide to start writing that query myself. So I've clicked on that and then I click next. So that's imported into it, close. I'll do that again. So I think I need to do that like about 6 more times. Import flat file, next, browse, employee ID, next. So it gives me an overview of what the employee ID looks like. And so you can see in the employee ID where it's mentioned primary key, this is unique itself. So that's, pick that. So employee ID is my primary key here. And like I mentioned, so you can see this one, number of variable characters for the notes is 450. So you can, the length of characters in that field or that column, you can write as much as 450 characters into that column. Okay, next, close that. So let's go to the next one, task, import file. Okay, okay, was employee. So I'm going to order details. Next, again. So order ID, order details. I'll use that as the primary key. So this is the, okay, yep. Okay, so close. I'll do that again. Okay. So the orders, this, okay, order ID is my primary key here. Next, next. I think we're almost done here, and then we'll create the relationships, import flat file again. And then we do for the product table. Okay, I just have a quick look at the product table. Okay, and there's a product ID with my primary key. So just to note, like this one here, you can see there's a new one which is float. Now, when you see the data type is a float, many times that's like where you have decimals. So you don't have an integer. As for those who did maths, it was like integer is like a whole number, but in this instance, when you see it's a float, that means that it can be in decimals as well. Okay. So let's pick the next one. What did I do there? So import flat file. Next. Okay, shippers. Next. Okay, so this isn't much. All right, shipper ID with my primary key, and then finish and close. And then the last table, I think we should be in the last table now. And then suppliers, next. All right, so we just check, quickly have a look at that. Okay, so I think that will be the supplier ID with the primary key here. Next, finish, and we are all done. So if I right click on the sales analysis database and then I refresh it and I click on tables here, you'll see all our tables are here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So all the tables are here. Now, once all the tables are here, we now want to create a relationship between those tables, because that's where it will help us when we want to start doing things like inner join, left join. That's something we'll look at next week anyway, but it's just to have an idea of how creating those relationships between the tables helps us when we start asking questions of the database. So if I right click on this database diagram, which is where we're going to use to create the database, the relationships, and then new database diagram. Okay. All right. So it will just ask, do you want to create the database? Does not have one or more of the object required database. Do you want to create them? Yes, I want to create it. Okay. And then I need to just select. So I'll hold Control on my keyboard and then select all the tables that I want to bring into this. And then I add it. All right, so let me zoom out a bit. So we're going to just create the relationships. So let me pull this to the other side of the screen so that I just have this as my guide. That makes it a little easy. All right, so we have the suppliers table here. So I want to bring this here. So this is the suppliers table. Let me zoom in a bit so I will see. There's something I just wanted to highlight. Now, if you look at this table, you'll see here the small key, which tells you that this is like the primary key in this table. If you right click on the table and then you click on table view and then show column names. Okay, no, not column name, it's table view and standard. All right, so it expands the table and you can see the different data types. And then if you want to make any adjustments in the table, say maybe I want to allow nulls or not, you can do that. But otherwise, if you don't need to do that, then that's fine. So I will take it back to just the column names. Okay. So I'm creating a relationship. Let me zoom this out a bit. So I want to create a relationship between the supplier table and the products table. So this is the suppliers table and then the products table. So if you recall what we talked about, we mentioned the primary key and then the foreign key. So in this table, the suppliers table, the supplier ID is the primary key. That's a unique value, while the product ID in the product table is the unique value. But when you want to do a lookup, that I want to do a reference from the suppliers table to the product table, we also have a supplier ID, which is the foreign key in the product table. And I will then use that to create a relationship between the supplier ID and within the suppliers table and then the product table. What I will do is just click on this and then drag it across to this table. And it would identify it and say, okay, supplier ID, category ID, no, that's not the relationship I want to create. So I need to check supplier ID is supposed to go to supplier ID. Yep. All right. So I had to drag it supplier ID on the other table. And I click OK. And then I OK that here. So that's suppliers to products. And then the next one, I want to create a relationship between the product table and then the category table. Okay, so this is the categories table here. Let me bring that. I also need the order details table. We'll soon be done with this, and then we might get into the more interesting part of it. Yeah. All right, so this is the categories table here, the order table. So I'm going to create a relationship between the product table and then the category table. And again, you will see that in the categories table, you have the category ID as the primary key, and you have a category ID field in the product table. Now, this is the foreign key. The product table, the category ID in the product table is the foreign key, while the category ID in the categories table is the primary key. So I'll click on that and then drag it across to this one here, create a relationship, and I OK it. Do the same for other details. So for the other details, this is the other details ID, and I am relating that to the products table. So let's see. Okay, yeah. So the product table from the primary key here is going to, let me take that. So the product ID here. Okay. All right. And then from the product table, we're going to the order ID. Okay, so the order ID from the products table, let's have a look at that. Okay, so that's the order details here. All right, so order details, order ID. So I'm taking the relationship here. This is the primary key here. I'm joining it to this one here. Okay. Right, then customers. So customers will go to the orders table, and you see the relationship customer ID will go to the customer ID in the orders table. Okay, and I think the employees, I think I have employees. There's still, I think there's one more table. Did I bring in the shippers table here? It should be here. Sorry, just bear with me. Let me just, okay, yeah, okay, I can see the shippers table here. Okay, so the employee ID table, so that's going to the order table. All right, so this is the employee ID. So I link it to the order ID table. All right, so that's done. And then the last table is the shippers table, which is linked to the, that's the orders table. All right, so I can take that here. Let me pull this down a bit. Okay. Okay, so this is the shippers. Okay, so this is the shippers ID. Sorry. Shippers ID comes to the shippers ID. All right, fantastic. Okay, so from here, I think I'm all done with this. And this is the relationship, as I call it, the entity relationship diagram, where you can see the relationship between the suppliers and then the product and the order ID and the order details. Product also has a relationship to categories table, and you see the relationship between orders details and the orders. And then you see orders is linked to the shippers table and also to the employees table and to the customers table. And this is the relationship here. And we can then proceed to start writing the queries here. So I'll save this and I'll give it a name, entity diagram sales analysis. All right. Okay. All right. So I think we're all good there. So it says that the following will be saved. Do you want to continue? Yes, I want to continue. Okay. All right. So that's all done. Now that I'm done with creating the entity relationship diagram, the next thing is if I want to start querying my table. As I said, a simple way to say query is to ask a question. Just as some persons will say when you are in the office, maybe if a person is sent a query is just you are asking the person questions to answer for certain things that have happened. That's all you're doing. Now, what I would do here is I would do two things at this point. I would use the benefit of things like ChatGPT and then DeepSeek, and I will also work with the knowledge, the base knowledge that I already have in this area. So that way, it helps us begin to see what we can leverage with the help of things like ChatGPT to speed up our learning. So the first one is, now in terms of the language, when you are writing the SQL language, you would always see things like select. So let me just write it here. Sorry, excuse me. You see select, you see from, which was where you talked about the data manipulation language. You see select from, you also have where, you also have, I think there is order by, you have the order by clause, you have the group by. So those are like some of the common ones that you will see. Now, if you were, when we see people write this language, see select from, that's what it's saying. This is the order, but in actual sense, the way the logic is from that location, from maybe the categories table, select what you want, and then you can now come to where there is a clause or something. So if you were, let's use a good illustration, you have a wardrobe. Your wardrobe is where you are going to select from. And then what you now say is where, so if I tell maybe someone, I say, oh, go to my bedroom, there is a wardrobe there. From that wardrobe, select 3 dresses. where those 3 dresses are color blue, and then order them from the shortest dress to the longest dress. That's what you want to do there. And that gives you an idea of how that works. So if you were to do it, let's use this as a good example. So I forgot to mention, now when I clicked on new query, you need to select the database you are going to be taking your query from. So if you look at this, it has automatically selected sales analysis, but I have other tables within my database, but I'm not going to be using that. So I've selected sales analysis. Now, if I want to select everything, so let me say I want to select everything from the employee table, and I go to select. Now, to select all, what I need to type is a star. So I'm going to say select all, which is star, from what's the table I want to pick from? I want to select from the employees table. And then please note, most times you would use a semicolon, because if you are writing other blocks of query, if you don't put a semicolon, it would, the way it works is it starts running from the top, and then maybe it might get, it would, I would say, hang kind of. So semicolon here, and that's it. And I execute my query. So you can see what it has done is, let me zoom this part. Can I zoom this in? It's not allowing me. Okay, let me zoom that to 200. It's not that one I wanted to zoom in. Okay, so you can see at the bottom here, select all from. So what it has done is it has returned everything that is in the employees table. Now, if I want to narrow down the maybe put a condition to say, okay, you selected everything from the employees table. However, where the employee ID is 1, that's the only one I want to see. All I will do is go to the next column and say where employee ID, okay, it's actually giving me is equals to 1, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so that should be all right. So you see where employee ID is equals to 1, it's giving me the employee ID for that person whose ID is 1. Now, sometimes from my experience, now, sorry, note one thing. There are slightly different variations of SQL. You could have SQL Server, which is Microsoft. You have the MySQL, and then there are a few other variants. So there would be some slight differences in how maybe like how you write those languages. But one of the things that I would use, for example, is maybe you've been handed a database and you don't know, you just know, like something that happened practically. When I joined an organization, I had to query a database. I knew what the database was, but I didn't know the tables that were in the database. So the question was, okay, how do I get the name of the table? So like here, you can already see the names of the table, so it's easy. But assuming I don't know the name of the tables, what am I going to do in order to get the name of the tables? So now, as I keep saying, it's always good to work smart, and let's try and be efficient in how we're doing our work. So I've opened ChatGPT, so I'll just quickly open that page and let's use that to make our work more efficient. Now, in doing that, which is where prompting comes in, and then what I want to be able to ask is, I want to write a query that will help me get the names of the table, that will help me get the name of the table in the database I am working with. So I will just simply do write a query to show the tables in the database called sales analysis. Okay. And I forgot. So good enough. Right. Fantastic. So what it has done here is it has given me a good, this is very good for practical purposes, because you can see there's my SQL, there's SQL Server, there's PostgreSQL, there's Oracle, and then you have SQLite. Now, the one we're working with is SQL Server. SQL Server. So what it's saying is select table from information.schema where table is equals to base. So I'll copy this one because this is the one that is relevant to us. And I'll come back here and I put that. However, I will make a slight adjustment because I really don't want, because sometimes, as I said, having some base knowledge is helpful. So I'll take out this one. Let me just, so if I want to gray out that row, I don't want it to indicate, all I just need to do is put a double dash and it takes out that query. So that way, when I execute the query, it won't run up to this point because I put a double hyphen there. And I would run this, put a colon here, and then execute. Now, what it's saying is select, let me take this one. I don't need this one as well. So let me run that again. All right, select table from information_schema.table. So that's like the query or the command that you would put there. And what it would do is it will go into the database that you are trying to query from, and it will give you the names of the tables in that database. So that's a case scenario where I don't know the names of the tables. I've just maybe joined and I need to now begin to ask questions to say, okay, what's the name of this table? What am I looking for here? And I get the name of the table. Once I get the name of the table, once I get the names of the tables, the next thing I can then start doing is to start writing the query to say, okay, let me even have an overview of what that table would look like. So if I were to do that and I come here and say, okay, now I know the names of the table and I want to see what's in those tables. And I say select star from, let's see, from products. So okay, so that's select all from products. That's what I'm saying here. Highlight it and I run that. And automatically I can see everything in the products table. The other part is, which is where, as I said, next week, we would have like the series of queries we're going to look at and then start taking that. But I'll just give a brief overview for the sake of, so we can make the most of time. Select all. Now, there are instances where you have a database that has over 1 million records. If you run this query and say select all from the products table, your system is going to you just like the system is taking a while to load because the resources that is required to pull that number of records is quite a lot. So normally what you can do is you can put a limit to say limit is say the top 10 records. So I want to just limit it to 10. And I think that's where this is slightly different, yes, because if I was using Postgre would use limit 10, but in Microsoft SQL Server, I think it's top, let me see, because top, it should be top, hold, let's see that, because many times, so this will be top, let's see, hold, this won't work. So what I would usually do for me really is just come back here and then I say, write a query in SQL Server to get the top 10 records. Okay. All right. So it's top 10 star. Yeah. So let's come back here to top 10 star. And I would execute this. All right. So what it has done is giving me the top 10 records in the database. Now, with that, if I wanted to do maybe arrange it from the lowest, from the highest order product ID to the highest, the other thing I can then do is say order by product ID and then descend. Yeah, descend is from highest to lowest. Okay. Okay, all right. So what it has done is it has given me the top 10, but how did it order it? It ordered it from the largest product ID to the lowest to the lowest in the top 10 anyway, product ID, and I can see that record. And if I wanted to put a condition to say where maybe the product name is equals to this, or maybe the supplier ID is a particular supplier ID, or maybe if I were to use category ID. So if I say select top 10 from product ID, and then the next one is where, so let me use a where the category ID, sorry, not categories, category, see typing that, sorry, category ID is equals to 1. Okay, and then I execute it. So what it has done is it's narrowed it down to say, okay, it's going to give me the top 10 product ID where the category ID is equals to 1, and then it will order it. So that's where I said when we are writing the sequences, usually you will start from the product, select what you want, where this is where maybe the particular item you want to narrow down your search with, and then you come to the order by a particular item. If you don't put the descend, that's DESC, by default, it will arrange it by ascending order. That's basically what it will do. It won't refine it further. But this is a simple way that you could look at it. If you wanted to write more complex queries, even without having significant knowledge of how that's of SQL itself, what you need to do is to be able to work with things like Chatgpt, as I was showing you, to say, okay, I need to find out this information. How am I going to do it? And that will speed up your learning process, so that instead of having to go through a lot of hoops and reading textbooks, it's good to read the textbooks, so please don't misconstrue that direction. It's good to read the textbooks, but you can become a lot more efficient using those tools. So what we will do at this point, I will park it here. I'll stop here, take any questions, because the goal for today was at least to create the database, which we've achieved, and then just to get a feel of what the query language will be. But what we can then move into when we come back next week is to actually start writing a query to ask questions. I think the other thing I would want to add here is I mentioned earlier that in this instance, we had created a sample database from the CSV files. But what if it's a scenario where I want to create a table in this database? Now, that's also possible. And as I keep saying, we can be efficient in how we work. I'm not going to, if I want to do it, I know that, yes, the command is I want to create. So what I can come back here again and say, write a query to create a table in my sales, was this sales? Yeah, sales analysis database. The name of the table will be department ID. Sorry, department ID, and the primary key will be the, sorry, okay, name of the table will be department, sorry, not department ID. So let's take this out. Name of the table will be department, and the primary key will be department ID. The fields in the table should be, so what would we put as the field? So in a department, you would have department name, role. What else do we have in a department? You have department name, you have role. I'm thinking of what else to put in a department ID, in department column. What other feature or attribute will we have in a department? Name, role, what else? Head of department. Let me just put head of department. Okay, I think I'll just leave it at that. Okay. And then, so Also, please note, as I mentioned, when we're creating it, the data type is important because when I am creating this, writing these prompts, having a knowledge of the data types, and I think we can go into further depth when we do that next week, writing the query, is what data type will each of the fields have? Will it be a text? Will it be an integer? Will it be a float? Or will it be maybe a string and text, about the same thing really. So if I say data type for the fields are as below. So I say name should be text, role should be text, head of department should be text, and then maybe years in department. I'll just add that. Should be integer. Yeah, okay. So let me add comma years in department. All right, and I enter that in. And so what it has done is it's giving me this to say, okay, this is the query, create table. What's the name of the table? Departments. What are the fields in that table? Department ID is going to be integer, and that will be the primary key here. Then the name, the variable number of variable characters will be 255. It should not be null. The role, number of variable characters should not be null. Head of department, number of variable characters, 255, not null. And then years in department, integer, not null. All right, so I can copy this, copy, and take this back. And I will run this. I think I don't have department here. Okay, so that's fine. We're good here. All right, so you can see command completed successfully, and I come back to my sales table and I refresh this, and let me check the tables. Yep. All right. So you can see it here, departments. So this is the table I just created, and it's now in the database. So all of that you can achieve when working with Chatgpt or Gemini or any of those tools. So and it makes our work more efficient. Once we've created that table, the other part will then be to insert records into the table. There are so if you had a database, which is what usually happens in the front end. So in the front end would be that maybe you have someone who is doing data entry. The table has been created, the person enters the data, and it flows through to the backend database where you now begin to see that the fields in that table are being populated with the information that is required. Now, all of this is just a base because the goal is that at the end of the day, I should now be able to start writing the query so that I can ask questions that will help inform decision making. Because ultimately, while it is good to have technical knowledge, the most important thing is how do I translate my technical knowledge into a skill or a competence that can help inform business decision and help my organization become more profitable, or even if not my organization, that can help me stand out within my organization as someone that adds value within that space. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also leave your feedback in the comment section on topics that you'd like me to look into, and I'll be happy to do so. Thank you.